All right, and we're back for UFC Fight Night, Reyes versus Prochazka, and we got a pretty solid main event here. Pretty solid main card overall. I mean, we got some good fights to showcase some contenders like Shikadze, Strickland, and Dvalishvili, and the card does fall off a bit after that. Not a ton of talent or name recognition beyond the main card, but we still got a pretty good card overall. I think the main event is really going to be carrying this, but again, before we get into this, we do have to hit the recaps. As much as I don't want to do this, did have a really bad night betting-wise and pick-wise. I mean, the card was really good overall, really exciting card. Probably one of the better cards in recent memory. And, from a betting perspective, though, did lose 4.8 units, I want to say. Let's take a look here real quick. Yeah, 4.8 units, only went 6 of 13 correct. So I think it's pretty obvious at this point. Just fade me for some easy money. So yeah, let's get right into this. And where do I even begin? Let's see here. All right, let's start with Rongzhu. So Rongzhu, I took the round 2, round 3 KO props. I just thought that he'd start to put it on a little bit going into the second and third round, especially if Vargas started to tire himself out a little bit. But Vargas really had a really nice jab. He was fighting behind and was really smart about it. Didn't get baited in against Rongzhu, and very good showing from him. But yeah, going forward, it's going to be really hard to put any sort of money on these guys coming out of the Chinese regional scene. I think the competition level there is just way too low, and I don't think you could really get much information from these guys. I think they're going to have to prove themselves a little more in the UFC before I put any sort of money on them. And moving right along, did put half a unit on Weidman by decision. I know I did officially pick Hall in my pick as my pick last week, but looking at the odds, I felt that Weidman were to win, it'd most likely be by decision, just grind it out. And for Hall to win, obviously he'd have to get the KO. But overall, when I was looking through the odds, I just felt that Weidman had a much better chance of getting the decision over Hall, since Hall is just not a very high output fighter. And I'll touch up on this a little bit again when I talk about the Grant fight, but man, I did not expect Weidman's leg to snap like that. Not that anyone did, but man, that shit was nasty. Not a great card if, you're squeamish, especially after that Crute fight where Crute's leg was just kind of flopping around like that. Anyways, moving right along. So Zhang Weili obviously lost. Second leg of my parlay did not come through. Obviously, she got head kicked, and, not much more I can say about that. Kind of slipped up a bit, but good on Rose for finding the mark there. Obviously, not the way I expected it to play out, but I think that when Weili does get the rematch, I think it'll be a bit more competitive. That said, though, I would like to see her face another contender before getting the rematch, but I'm not quite sure who a suitable opponent would be. But moving right along, I also had a play on Carl Roberson over Brendan Allen. I just felt that Roberson might have had a better chance, keeping it standing, do a bit more damage on the feet, but, Allen eventually did get it to the ground. Very slick BJJ, was able to get the submission there. And then lastly, I did put half a unit on Sekulic over Grant, and the reason for that was, like I mentioned before, Grant, super low volume, very KO reliant. If he's not getting that KO, it's going to be really hard for him to win the decision there. And while I did not agree with the decision, I can't be too upset about it because I didn't feel like Sekulic really did too much. I mean, he did land a few takedowns, but he wasn't really doing much with it. Grant was getting back up, but at the end of the day, I don't think that was a terrible bet. I think it was a 50-50 fight, and if you're going to give me plus 185 odds on it, I will take it every single time. But yeah, that'll do it for the recap. Let's get right into this card. We got a number of fights to break down. And moving right into the first fight of the night, we have KB Bhullar versus Andreas Michailidis. And my God, KB Bhullar, the return of KB Bhullar. I mean, I was shitting on this guy so hard in one of my previous breakdowns. But, in hindsight, I probably should have cut him a little slack. He made a pretty short notice debut against Tom Breeze, who, in my opinion, is a really solid striker. But let's take a look at the odds first. Michailidis is going to be the minus 250 favorite. Bhullar's the plus 210 underdog. And let's start with Bhullar first. So very limited tape on him. Pretty much everything that I was able to find on him was from that Tom Breeze fight. And to start off, I mean, the guy's really tall. He's a tall, rangy fighter, but, he tends to kind of blitz in a bit with some of his strikes. I was doing this really weird, like kind of stutter step, sort of 1-2 against Tom Breeze. He does also have a pretty nice body and leg kick that he likes to throw. However, he is a bit hittable and does seem a little slow. That being said, though, it was against someone like Tom Breese, who I think definitely is UFC caliber and is a pretty dangerous striker in his own regard. And as much as I want to hate on Bhullar for getting crumpled by a jab, I think he did actually get caught with a pretty clean left hook a little earlier in the fight that might have, shooken him up. That said, though, I'm not very high on Bhullar. But at the same time, I'm not really high on Michailidis either. I mean, Michailidis, he's a really heavy hitter, really tends to load up on his punches and kicks. But again, with these guys who are heavy hitters, they're really low output. They're always looking for that shot. And if, they don't land cleanly, it's really hard for them to win a decision. So while he does have the power to potentially catch and put KB Bhullar out, I think that if he doesn't land, then he's going to have a really hard time getting the decision. And from what I've seen so far, the gas tank of Michailidis doesn't really seem to check out either. He's had a number of first-round finishes, and even in his fight against Prochazka, he was slowing down considerably after the first 2.5 minutes of the first round. So really, I just don't see how Michailidis is this big of a favorite. I know Bhullar had a really disappointing UFC debut, but given the circumstances, I'm willing to let it slide a little bit. And this does remind me a bit of the Jacob Malkoun situation where we had a pretty green fighter making his UFC debut and just completely fell flat on his face and is being a little undervalued now going into his second fight. And, especially against someone like Michailidis, who, again, I'm not really high on. I just don't see why the line should be this wide. So taking a look at how I think this fight will likely play out, just based off of the very limited tape that I found so far, I think that if Bhullar is able to, stay at distance, work the kicks, pump the jab out, I think he could give Michailidis a lot of trouble. I mean, Michailidis is going to be really reliant on just landing that bomb. And if, Bhullar is staying defensively sound, I think that he could definitely just outpoint Michailidis to a decision here. I don't know if he'll get the knockout. I mean, Bhullar, he's gotten a ton of knockouts, a ton of finishes, early in his career at the regional scene. But, these guys are really low-level guys. But Michailidis, he has been finished a couple of times, so I wouldn't say the knockout is out of the cards, but I think that if Bhullar just plays it smart, I think he could definitely just cruise to a decision here, especially, later in the fight as, I think Michailidis will start to slow down a bit. So, yeah, I'm going to make a bold prediction to kick off the card. I'm going to go with Bhullar here. As far as the bet goes, I might just put half a unit on Bhullar, too. I just really don't see why Michailidis is this big of a favorite. And as far as, where the line is going to move, I think that it's going to get a little wider than it is now. So I'm going to sit back on this a little bit. But, I'm more than happy to take Bhullar at plus 200 right now. But yeah, the pick is Bhullar, and just going to wait and see where the line goes. But I will most likely be putting half a unit on Bhullar. And moving right along to the next fight, we have Felipe Colares versus Luke Sanders. And the odds for this fight have not come out just yet. This was a pretty short notice fight. Both of these guys were actually matched up against different opponents, but both of their opponents pulled out, and now they're matched up with each other. So I'll kind of give my... I'll cap this fight after, I do the breakdown on both of these guys. But let's start with Colares. I mean, this guy sucks, man. He stands tall, has a karate style, but his output is very low, and I think he does prefer to grapple, but his top pressure isn't great, isn't the most active on top either, and, in both of his losses, he was actually out-grappled, and in the fight that he did win, it was a very sloppy, grindy sort of fight where, while he did have the majority of the control time, he just wasn't doing much with it, and he never really put his stamp on the fight, and he kind of just won the fight on the basis of nothing was really going on, but, he kind of just had a bit more control time. So overall, extremely unimpressed with Colares so far. He's not a very exciting fighter to watch, and honestly, I think he gets cut if he loses this. I just don't really see him having much of a future in the UFC. But his opponent, Luke Sanders, seems to have pretty heavy hands, likes to blitz in, throw really heavy combos, has really good counterpunching and, some pretty heavy leg kicks. But the issue with him is he just doesn't really move his head and is constantly getting clipped in the pocket. His durability is potentially an issue. So, man, as much as I favor Sanders to win in this matchup, I think he's got the better striking. It's that he does get a little wild in the pocket, and, while I don't really think that Colares is that good, Sanders is going to give plenty of opportunities for Colares to catch him in the pocket. As far as his grappling goes, though, Sanders does have okay takedown defense. It's nothing great, and he does fight to get himself back up to the feet. But as far as how this matchup is going to go, I do favor Sanders a bit more in here in this matchup. I think I'd cap him at around like minus 150, minus 160 or so. I do favor striking a bit more on the feet. I think he's going to be the aggressor. But the concerns that I do have with Sanders, again, is he does get a little wild. His durability is absolutely an issue. And, potentially his cardio too. I mean, he hasn't been to a decision in, over 2 years now. And the last time it happened, it was against Patrick Williams, who was absolutely gassed after that first round, and he wasn't able to put him away. So a lot of concerns on Sanders's end, but I do think he is the better fighter here. I think he's going to be hitting a little harder. I think he's going to be potentially beating Colares to the punch as well. But again, if this fight gets beyond, the first round and a half and Colares is able to get his grappling going, I think he can make it kind of tough, can make it a little bit grindy. But all in all, I do favor Sanders a bit more. I think he's, again, the better fighter. It's just that there are some concerns surrounding him. So the pick here is going to be Sanders. I don't know what the line's going to look like. If the line's really egregious, I might take a stab on Sanders, but as of right now, I don't have any intentions of betting this fight. And in the next matchup, we have Loma Lookboonmee versus Sam Hughes. Lookboonmee is going to be the minus 355 favorite. Comeback on Hughes is plus 290. And let's start with Hughes here. So from what I've seen so far on the tape, nothing really impressive, just really simple with her striking. Primarily, just likes to back opponents down, pump the jab in the overhand, and, we'll occasionally throw some leg kicks in there, but, overall, her striking's, pretty basic. But, I do have to say she does seem to have some power and is pretty tough. We'll like to move forward, and, she'll eat some shots, but, that's not going to slow her down at all. But as far as her overall game goes, though, just nothing super impressive. I mean, she's pretty low level still and has primarily fought pretty low level opponents as well. Meanwhile, her opponent Loma, while she is still pretty green to the the MMA scene, she is a Muay Thai champ. So right off the bat, she's already got a really solid background that she's going to. And, you can kind of see it in her fights, too, against lower level opponents. She's able to just clinch them up, just land some, really vicious knees in the clinch. And elbows too, on the feet, she's got really solid leg and body kicks as well, especially that front body kick she likes to go to, and, does have decent counter striking in addition to that. And I think she'll likely be, the quicker fighter in there. She's going to be a little smaller, which, I'll touch on that in just a second. But as far as her grappling goes, though, defensively, she does seem to have pretty decent hips, good takedown defense, and is pretty good at finding her way back to her feet. Like, she's not going to accept just being on bottom position for long. But one thing, I do want to touch up on, like I said before, is going to be the size disadvantage. And, she's going to be much smaller in a lot of her fights, at least in the UFC. She's, I think, more naturally an atom weight, but, since that division doesn't really exist in the UFC, she's fighting, a lot of other women who are going to be much bigger and stronger than her. However, the discrepancy in skill, I think, more than compensates for it. I mean, she's routinely outsized in her matchups in, MMA, and she's been able to overcome that, like in her fight with, against Fry and, Alexandra Albu and Monique Adriani. The only time I feel like the size discrepancy really played a factor was in her fight against Hill, where, Hill, she's a legit vet at this point in the UFC and, was one of the only fighters that was able to kind of hang in with her, on a technical level and, was able to use her size advantage pretty well in that matchup as well. But in all these other matchups, you see that even though, Loma is much smaller, I mean, she's ridiculously smaller. Like all these other chicks, they're pretty jacked and ripped in there and, has a pretty sizable, size advantage. But, Loma looking kind of pudgy in there, still able to just tie up with these other chicks and is able to, control them in the clinch and land her knees and, her kicks and everything. So I see this matchup playing pretty similar to that. I mean, Sam Hughes is, again, pretty low level, and I just don't see, the size advantage that she has playing that big of a factor. I think Loma is just going to be able to beat her up in the clinch. We'll likely kick at her at range and, hit her while she's coming in. Sam Hughes is very, basic with her striking, very telegraphed with her shots. So I think, Loma should be able to just beat her up for 3 rounds. So yeah, I got Loma here, and I do have her in a parlay as well with someone later in the card. I actually have her parlayed up with Sean Strickland. And as far as the odds go for that, right now, let me take a look here. Yeah, so the odds for that comes out to about like minus 124 if you got both fighters parlayed, and I'll touch up on that a little bit later when I do get there. But as for right now, I am picking Loma, and I do have her as part of a two-leg parlay with Sean Strickland. And moving right along, we have Kai Kamaka versus TJ Brown. And Kamaka is going to be the minus 160 favorite. Brown is the plus 140 underdog. And let's start with Kamaka here. So Kamaka, on the feet, he likes to pressure. He's got pretty, good striking in my opinion. Solid jab, good combination striking. Mixes it up pretty well, and does give a lot of different looks to opponents. Surprisingly, though, he doesn't have any knockouts for someone who, in my opinion, seems to have a bit of power in his hands, or at least he throws with, quite a bit of power. He does seem to hurt his opponents, but hasn't been able to get the finish. Has only one finish on his career, and that was like a rear naked choke. So no knockouts in his career just yet. But on the feet, he is pretty aggressive. Defensively is pretty good too. He moves his head pretty well and does keep his hands up. Does shell up a little bit, when opponents start to flurry on him. But as far as his grappling goes, that's where things get really interesting, right? So his offensive grappling is decent. I've seen in a number of fights he'll look to, cage push or just take opponents down near the end of the round to win fights. And, I really like that about him. He's got a good, style that is, really conducive to winning rounds. Like, he's got really good output on the feet and usually does look to secure the takedown to ultimately, win the round. However, his defensive grappling is really questionable, and I think that really kind of showed itself in his most recent fight against Jonathan Pearce, where, he had a pretty sizable advantage on the feet, I'd say, and, was hitting, takedowns of his own, but once Pearce started to, scramble and reverse him a bit, Kamaka just continuously gave up his back, and eventually he got flattened out and got ground and pounded to a finish. So yeah, that was really concerning in the sense that he really started to struggle when he wasn't in a dominant position, and that's just very concerning, especially going forward when he's going up against another grappler. And TJ Brown, he's a grappler. I don't think he's really that high level, but that's definitely something in the back of my mind, going forward. And something I do also want to mention, and I'm not even sure how accurate of a take this is I think his cardio is a little suspect in the sense that he's not huffing and puffing by the second or third round, but he puts on a pretty grueling pace. He likes to really push it with his striking. He does look to grapple at the end of rounds, and he's doing a lot in there. He's got really high output, but later in the fights, I do notice that he does get a bit sloppy, defensively, and he does put himself in really bad positions as the fight goes on because I think he's tired in there. I think he's not really good at managing his pace. I think that if opponents are able to put up a bit of a fight, put up some resistance, I think they could definitely, put him in a really compromising situation later in the fight. And his opponent, TJ Brown, is he going to be the guy to do this? I'm not entirely sure he is, because TJ Brown I'm not really high on as well. For someone who's, supposedly got a wrestling base, he doesn't seem to be that good at wrestling. He went against Danny Chavez in his last fight, and honestly, it was just a really poor performance in my opinion. Honestly, kind of made me overvalue Chavez a little bit. I ended up taking a stab on Chavez against I don't remember who the next fight was. I believe it was Gordon, where I thought that, Chavez, he had a pretty good showing, showed, decent takedown defense against, TJ Brown, but I think I kind of overvalued him there. But in any case, I just don't feel that, TJ Brown is really that good. On the feet, he's got, some decent leg kicks. But, he does stand pretty heavy on his lead leg as well, so he's pretty susceptible to leg kicks as well. And, he is, again, primarily a wrestler. He does look to take his opponents down, look to secure some control time, work some ground and pound, and, he will look for the submission as well. However, in his last fight against Chavez, he kind of just stopped shooting takedowns after he had a few of them stuffed. And that is a little bit concerning in the sense that, he might not be someone that'll aggressively pursue a takedown if, he's not really having much success there. because I definitely feel his path to victory here is to look to grapple with Kamaka, look to wear him down a bit, and accumulate some control time, grind on him, and just get a decision that way. But Kamaka, he does have pretty good takedown defense, at least in that first level. Once you do take him down though, and you're in scrambles, and you're fighting for position, that's when he kind of struggles a bit. But if Kamaka is able to stuff that initial takedown of Brown, and Brown isn't chain wrestling or isn't shooting multiple takedowns, then I definitely see Kamaka taking this. So seeing Brown in his last fight, very concerning in the sense that he wasn't able to continuously go to his takedowns. And then with Kamaka, his last fight was concerning in the sense that once he did get taken down, he looked very lost there. And so, we have two guys who, I think have pretty clear paths to victory if they are able to keep it within, their specialty. But, as far as how this fight will play out, though, I do favor Kamaka a little bit more just because, I like his stand-up some more. And, he does have pretty good takedown defense. So I do favor Kamaka here, but I feel like the line is pretty wide still. I think the value side is Brown because I see a pretty clear path to victory for him. But it really just comes down to how aggressive TJ Brown is with his takedown attempts and how often he really is going to go to it. But from a pure pick perspective, I'm just going to go with Kamaka here. I think that if he is able to keep it standing, discourage Brown from continuously shooting, he should be able to piece up Kamaka, or he should be able to piece up Brown, and he might even be able to land a few offensive takedowns of his own, since we did see Chavez have some success with some offensive takedowns as well. So I'm going to pick Kamaka here, but I'm definitely not betting him at these odds. Maybe if it gets closer to a pick 'em, I might take a shot there. But even then, I don't know if I want to bet Kamaka as a favorite at this point. So the pick is Kamaka, but no bet. All right, moving right along, we have Gabriel Benitez versus Jonathan Pearce, and Benitez is going to be the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Pearce is plus 170. And let's start with Benitez first. So on the feet, Benitez, pretty good jab. Fights behind it pretty damn well, I'd say. Quick 1-2, but his kicks are really where it's at. He loads up big time on his kicks and, digs really hard to the body. The commentators are always gushing about how hard his leg kicks are, so I'll take their word on it. He does tend to have a pretty high work rate as well. But my concern with Benitez is he does seem to have potential durability issues. I mean, he's been finished and, hurt on multiple occasions. As far as his grappling goes, though, his takedown defense is decent. While he has been taken down on multiple occasions, it's really hard to keep him down. He fights really hard to get back to his feet. And taking a look at his opponent, Jonathan Pearce, this guy on the feet, his striking is pretty stiff. I think Benitez is going to be able to piece him up pretty badly if it stays standing. Pearce, he leaves his chin out quite a bit when he's throwing. He's getting beat up by guys, at a much lower level. So I think that, on the feet, Benitez won't have any issue finding, the mark on him. The thing I like about Pearce, though, is he does push a pretty crazy pace. He's one of those guys who really just weaponizes his cardio. I mean, the guy is able to just continuously, just throw, is continuously looking for takedowns. I mean, his work rate is extremely high, right? Like, he kind of reminds me a bit of guys like, Dvalishvili and, Holloway, who, obviously not at that level, but is able to just completely outwork his opponents, overwhelm them with volume, and eventually just break them down later in the fight just by, putting all the volume on them. That said, though, he's not a very technical fighter by any means. He's just able to put on a pretty crazy pace on his opponents and, wear them down. But as far as this matchup goes, I am going to favor Benitez a bit more. Obviously, he's going to be the much more proven fighter. He's fought higher level competition. He's the better striker and really just the more proven UFC fighter at this point. That said, though, I think the line is a bit wide. While I do favor Benitez on the feet, I think that if Pearce is able to close the distance and get his hands on Benitez, I think he can make this fight, much closer than it should be. He can definitely, start to, look to grapple with Benitez, tire him out a bit, and really look to just mitigate Benitez's most dangerous weapons, which, I believe are his kicks and his striking. That said, though, while I do think that Pearce has the tools to win, I don't think he does, though. I think this could be a situation where Benitez is able to just completely outclass him, keep the fight standing, and just hurt him on the feet. So the pick here is Benitez, but I wouldn't be super confident enough to lay the minus 200 on him. So again, the pick is Benitez. I think that if he is able to keep it standing, he wins a pretty comfortable decision. Might even get the knockout. But, if Pearce is able to, get his hands on Benitez, he could make this a very grindy sort of fight. But again, the pick here is Benitez, but not looking to bet this one either. And to cap off the prelims, we have Randa Markos versus Luana Pinheiro. And I just got to say, how's this fight so high up on the card? How is this the featured prelim? We have Randa Markos, the plus 155 underdog, against Pinheiro, the minus 180 favorite. I just don't see it. This is going to be a pretty boring fight, in my opinion. How is Randa Markos still in the UFC, if I'm being honest? She's 1-4 in her last 5. 10-10 overall. I mean, offensively, her striking isn't great. She's not a very high volume fighter. She doesn't really throw much, doesn't really shoot at any takedowns anymore. And, at this point in her career, she's 35. I just don't really see much upside in her. I mean, you could make the argument that she's losing to, fighters like Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Ribas, Claudia Gadelha. I mean, yeah, they're all really solid fighters in the UFC, but Markos just did not look good in any of those fights. And at this point, I just really don't know what she really brings to the table. That said, though, she is going up against Luana Pinheiro, who potentially could be another Contender Series bust. But as far as, what she does well from what I've seen, she does have decent footwork. Got a good leg kicking game, a good side kick, jab, 1-2. Does seem to have some good feints. So overall, it looks like she's kind of passing the eye test a bit, but again, very low level fighters she's going up against. And, in these Contender Series fights, which are essentially just showcase fights, very little resistance, she's able to put these other fighters away. So, while I do favor her a little bit in this fight, this could potentially be another massive letdown spot. I mean, these Contender Series fighters have been dropping the ball lately. And, while I think that Pinheiro should get the win here, she's more athletic, younger, more aggressive. But that said, though, again, these Contender Series fighters have having a pretty, rough go of it lately. And there's a good chance that, she's could be a total can too. I mean, she's been facing some really low-level fighters who really haven't been putting up much resistance. So this could be, again, a massive letdown spot. I wouldn't look to bet this fight. I'm going to take Pinheiro, but yeah, again, I'm not going to touch this fight from a betting perspective at all. And to kick off the main card, we have Poliana Botelho versus Luana Carolina. And we got another low-level women's MMA fight this high up in the card. And, honestly, I feel these should be curtain jerkers, but anyways, Botelho is going to be the minus 213 favorite. Come back on Carolina's plus 183. And let's start with Poliana Botelho first. So, Muay Thai base. She's got very heavy leg kicks. We'll throw some spinning attacks, but her fight IQ is just a bit questionable. I mean, in her fight against Lauren Mueller, where she was hurting her with leg kicks, instead of continuing to look to stand up with her, she decides to just close the distance and just kind of wall install the remainder of the fight. But I felt like she had a pretty decent advantage on the feet and was actually hurting Mueller. So I'm not sure why she decided to just wall install instead of look to put a stamp on the fight. Not a good look in my opinion, but I guess she just wanted the easy decision instead of really just looking to push herself. So I'm not really a fan of that. And in a lot of her fights, I've noticed that she kind of just relies a bit on her strength to get herself out of bad positions, whether, it's with the defensive grappling or to, with her just lay and pray or wall install. So not very technical, not very skilled, just, is a bit of a bully with her size. And taking a look at her opponent, Luana Carolina, not very impressive either. I mean, her striking is very sloppy, winging loopy strikes. Gets pretty wild in exchanges, leaves her chin, high up in the air. And something I don't really like is it looks like she closes her eyes in some of these exchanges. But yeah, I don't know what her deal is, but I don't really like her stand-up much. She does seem to have a decent clinch game, very heavy knees in the clinch, but outside of that, I just don't really see what she does well. And as we saw in her last fight, she seemed just completely lost on the ground as well. So I'd say she has really low level, defensive grappling. Yeah, just a very low level fighter overall. But, as far as this matchup goes, though, I do favor Poliana a little bit more here. I think that on the feet, at distance, she's going to be giving Karolina a lot of trouble. But, Karolina, she could just look to, clinch up with her. But I just don't think that Karolina has too many paths to victory. I think that if Poliana wants, she can just look to wall install, maybe even take Karolina to the ground and kind of just lay on top of her. I think that would be a very easy path to victory for her. But on the feet, I do favor Poliana a bit more. That said, though, this is a really low-level fight, and while I do think that Karolina's pretty bad, I don't think that Poliana is really anything to write home about either. And, something that I guess kind of consider also is Karolina has some serious durability issues. I mean, she had like a broken spine or something a little while back, and then I think she tore her ACL in her last fight. So, very fragile fighter. And, in this fight, I don't know if it'll play too much of a factor, but that definitely is a concern. Not that I'll ever bet her or anything, but yeah, just a lot of red flags around Karolina, aside from the fact that she's kind of low level. So the pick here is Botelho, Poliana Botelho, but again, another really low level fight I don't want to bet. Okay, moving right along, I think this is where the card really starts to get interesting here. We have Merab Dvalishvili versus Cody Stamann, and Dvalishvili is going to be the minus 235 favorite. Come back on Stamann, plus 200. And let's start with Dvalishvili first. So on the feet, I mean, he's got pretty wild loopy striking. Does have that spinning back fist that he likes to go to continuously. We'll go to the well with that quite a bit, actually. I don't know if he's actually hit it before, but that's something he really likes to go to. And, I think it's a little telegraphed as well. He tends to load up on it quite a bit. But, yeah, he's got a crazy high work rate. He's constantly moving, constantly throwing. Yeah, he's constantly working, has crazy cardio. And obviously the thing with, Merab is he likes to just chain takedowns, let you get back up, rinse and repeat. And I know he's going to get some shit for not having a lot of control time, but I think that's just his style. I mean, he's able to let you get back up so that he could take you back down, let you burn your cardio a bit, because he knows that, he's got superior cardio. And I think he's, again, one of these guys who's able to just weaponize his pace and just smother you with takedowns, not let you really get any sort of offense going. And you're spending the whole fight trying to get off your back, trying to get off the fence. And the second you do, he'll shoot another takedown, and next thing you know, 4 minutes are gone, and you haven't really done shit the whole round. That said, though, Merab is a little one-dimensional in that sense. He's primarily just looking for the takedown. He doesn't really generate much offense otherwise, because on the feet, I mean, he's able to get away with being a little wild because he can just close the distance and shoot the takedown. But his striking isn't very technical, and he doesn't really have much power. And on the ground, he doesn't really have much of a submission game either, so he's pretty reliant on just continuously hitting takedowns and, yeah, just pretty much just hitting takedowns, right? I mean, he's really good at it, but I think if he's going up against someone with good takedown defense and solid boxing, he could be in a bit of trouble. And I'm not sure if Stamann is going to be this opponent, but, if we're going to take a look at what Stamann does well, he's going to be, I think, the better boxer in this matchup. He's going to have the shorter reach, but I think he's going to be a bit more technical on the feet. He does have a decent leg kicking game as well, but overall, he's not a big power puncher or anything. He's a bit of a decisionator himself. So, yeah, I think on the feet, he's not going to be landing, super heavy shots or anything on Merab, and Merab is pretty tough. But yeah, on the feet, I think that Stamann should be able to just kind of pitter-patter his way to a decision. That said, though, I don't think Merab is going to let him do that. He's going to be continuously shooting for takedowns. And, the defensive grappling of Stamann is pretty good, too. I mean, he's got good wrestling himself. As far as the takedown defense goes, I'd say it's pretty solid. I mean, he digs underhooks pretty well and does seem to have pretty good hips. That said, though, he has been taken down on a number of occasions, even though they are against, pretty solid wrestlers. I think it is pretty inevitable that Merab will be able to land some takedowns on Stamann. I think that Stamann won't have any trouble getting back up either. He's pretty good at working his way back to his feet, and again, Merab just isn't really that good at holding opponents down. Overall, I do favor Merab a bit more in this matchup. I think that, his continuous wrestling pace is going to be a bit too much for Stamann. I do think that Merab can win just on the basis of, landing 6 or 7 takedowns over the course of the fight. However, I do have to say I think the line is a bit wide because we did see in his last fight what happens if, Merab isn't able to continuously take his opponent down in John Dodson, where he was only able to get 2 takedowns that fight, but because Dodson was just extremely low output and didn't throw at all, he never really put a stamp on that fight and never really gave the judges a reason to score the fight for him. But, if Stamann could hold Dvalishvili to, 2 or 3 takedowns the whole fight, I think he's got a decent chance of potentially stealing a decision because on the feet, I do favor Stamann a bit more. I think, again, he's the more technical striker. So yeah, if he's able to stuff a few of, Merab's takedowns, keep the fight standing, I think he could eke out a decision here. So while I am going to take Merab as my, official pick here, betting-wise, I am going to put half a unit on Stamann by decision, just because Stamann has historically been a decisionator. Not much power, not much of a submission game, a bit of a grinder himself. So I think if he is to win, it'll most likely be by decision. So yeah, I'm just waiting for the props to come out. I think something else to look at is possibly the goes to a decision prop, but I think that line's going to be pretty chalky considering both of these guys are a bit of decisionators. But yeah, I think the value side here is Stamann. So yeah, the official pick is Merab, but as far as bets go, I'm looking to put maybe half a unit on Stamann by decision. Going to look at and see what the odds are for the goes to decision prop too. And in the next matchup, we have Sean Strickland versus Krzysztof Jotko, and Strickland's going to be the minus 245 favorite, and Jotko's going to be the plus 210 underdog. And let's start with Jotko here. So Jotko has been in the UFC for quite a while now, and surprisingly long. And, honestly, it hasn't been really impressive throughout his whole UFC tenure. And, I think the reason for that is because he's just really made a career out of beating guys who don't really belong in the UFC. I mean, if you just look through the guys he's beaten so far, a lot of guys no longer with the promotion or, just bottom of the barrel guys who probably won't be around for much longer. And as far as his fights go, they're nothing impressive either. I mean, this guy's really just a decisionator. So, he's out here decisionating guys who are not really UFC level, and he never really puts a stamp on any fight. He's barely just doing enough to win. So yeah, I'm not really high on this guy at all, but it is impressive how long he's just hung around in the UFC beating these low level guys. But skill set wise, as far as what he does well, I mean, he's pretty light on his feet, lots of good lateral movement. He's got a good, low leg kick jab, and, we'll occasionally mix in, the takedown. We'll look to wall install, accumulate some control time. But, again, overall, just not very impressive. He's barely just doing enough to win in all of his matches. So, he's got a good, I guess, point fighting style, round winning style. And that kind of works against lower level guys, who aren't able to implement their game plan. But, against someone like Strickland, who I think is a really solid boxer, he should be able to kind of just walk right through Jotko, if I'm being honest. But yeah, taking a look at Strickland, so like I was saying, really, really good boxing. He likes to pressure opponents, walk them down, back them up against the cage. He's got a really stiff jab, 1-2, nice cross as well. And, I just want to touch on his jab, though. Really, really stiff, really quick, almost no tell on it. So yeah, he looks really, really sharp with in the boxing department. He does mix it up pretty well, does like to go to the body, and does have pretty solid counter punching as well. But I guess the only knock I really have on him is he's a bit one-dimensional as far as, he's primarily a boxer. He will occasionally, shoot the takedown, but for the most part, he'll look to keep it standing, throw his hands. We'll occasionally throw a front body kick, but yeah, just primarily a striker. Something I do want to mention that, is a little bit concerning is, he's coming off of a pretty nasty motorcycle incident or accident, and, he fucked up his knee pretty bad. But, he's had 2 fights since and has looked pretty good so far. I mean, he's beat up pretty low-level guys as far as, stand-up goes. But, he didn't look too rusty or anything. Seemed to still have quite a bit of pop in his shots. Not super mobile, though, but, he's always kind of been like that. I am a little surprised we don't see, more leg kicks thrown at him by opponents, considering, he's had a pretty nasty injury, knee injury. So, we might see Jotko go attack it a little bit, and that could be a concern here. But, as far as how this matchup goes, I think Strickland takes it pretty handily in like the striking. I think that he's going to be able to pressure Jotko pretty easily. He's going to be landing the much heavier shots. He's going to be the one moving forward. So, at least from an optic standpoint, he's going to be winning it on the judges' scorecards. And I don't know if he's going to knock Jotko out. I mean, Strickland, he's got good power. He's got good accuracy. But Jotko, I mean, he's been pretty good defensively so far and is pretty good at circling out and, staying active on the feet. That said, though, he has been finished twice by knockout. So, Strickland might be able to find the button there, but I think more likely than not, we see Strickland take it to decision and just win on the basis of doing more damage, being the one that's moving forward, being the aggressor. So I'm taking Strickland here, and like I said before, I do have him as the second leg of a parlay with Loma. Again, the odds for that come out to about like minus 124, and I do have 2 units placed on that. So, the pick here is Strickland, and he is a part of a parlay.
And in the next fight, we have Cutelaba versus Dustin Jacoby. And right now, Cutelaba is the minus 135 favorite. Comeback on Jacoby is plus 115. And let's start with Cutelaba first. I mean, this guy, pretty straightforward. This guy's an extremely wild fighter. Really aggressive in the first round. And, is essentially first round knockout or bust. But yeah, like I said before, he's got very wild striking, likes to start extremely aggressively, and loads up quite a bit in his on his punches. He does seem to have a decent clinch game as well, but outside of that first round, he slows down significantly. And while I do believe he has some serious cardio issues, I think he also struggles with the pacing, because a lot of the time, he's swinging really wild in that first round, and he's looking for shots that aren't necessarily there. He'll kind of try and look to punch through opponent's guard and look to just headhunt, even if their opponents are shelling out pretty well. So not the best shot selection, and just very terrible pacing. Overall, I actually think that if Cutelaba were to pace himself a little better, look for openings, to blitz in and swing heavy, he could definitely carry some of his power into the later rounds and still be competitive there, as opposed to just being first round or bust. But from what I've seen so far, he hasn't really shown any inclination to do that. So I'm just going to assume that, based off of his history, he's just going to come out swinging again and likely completely fall off a cliff after that first round. But taking a look at, Dustin Jacoby, pretty good kickboxer. He's got, good leg kicks and fights really well behind that jab. His output isn't the greatest, but in all of his most recent fights, at least, he does fight pretty composed and, will consistently go to the leg kicks and the jab. So I think that, outside of that first round, if, Jacoby is able to weather that storm, I think he'll look to just jab and kick at Cutelaba and likely just outpoint him and win a decision there. However, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Cutelaba got knocked out here, especially, going into that second and third round. If he starts to gas out a bit and, slows down, lets his guard down and, starts getting beat up there. So, yeah, the pick here is going to be Jacoby. I'm looking to actually bet him too, but right now it looks like the line is starting to widen up a little bit, because it seems like some money's still coming in on Cutelaba for some reason. So, yeah, I'm going to wait to see how wide this line gets before I take a stab at Jacoby. I think that this should more or less be a pick'em fight. I think any sort of plus money on Jacoby is going to be good value. So I'm going to put a unit on Jacoby. Maybe look to even hedge out with like a Cutelaba first round knockout. Obviously, if Cutelaba comes in here really measured, paces himself, I'm completely fucked. But I just don't think that he's going to be making these adjustments this late in his career. So hold on here. Cutelaba he's actually only 27, so he might actually be young enough in his career to be, making the adjustment. So I guess I can't completely rule that out, but until he shows otherwise, I'm just going to assume he'll be going all in that first round. But yeah, outside of that first round, I do favor Jacoby a bit more. Although something to consider, though, is Jacoby may potentially be chinny. So that first round knockout is very live, in my opinion. Yeah, there's been a number of fights where Jacoby's been he's been knocked out, and he has been hurt. So not going to rule out that first round knockout for Jacoby, but at the end of the day, I am going to go with Jacoby. Might just hedge with like a first round knockout prop for Cutelaba. And in the co-main event, we have Giga Chikadze versus Cub Swanson. So Chikadze is going to be the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Swanson is plus 170. And let's start with Swanson here. So yeah, Swanson, he's been in the game for quite a while, and that's definitely a concern going into this fight. He's got pretty heavy hands. He mixes it up really well to the body and the head. Can be pretty aggressive sometimes, but the main concern really for him is, he's 37, and in terms of fight years, he's pretty high up there too. He's 27-11. He's taken a ton of damage over the course of his career. Has gotten a number of injuries as well. So that's a really big concern, honestly. I bring up the age quite a bit. And, I definitely feel that it is going to be a pretty big factor going into this. Like, again, the wear and tear on the body, I'd say even just like the reaction times are much, much slower. Like in his fight with Kron Gracie, where, Kron Gracie's just had pretty awful stand-up, was still able to, touch up Swanson quite a bit. Obviously, Swanson did win that fight, and he did, piece up Gracie pretty badly, but, defensively, he was still getting hurt by Gracie. Well, not hurt, but he was still getting tagged up by Gracie. And then in his fight with Pineda, he did look pretty good that fight, but I think Pineda just came into that fight without any respect for Swanson. Was kind of just walking him down, and he let his guard down. I think he was overlooking Swanson, and he paid for it. But in this fight, I don't think Chikadze is going to look to do that. He's very calm, very composed in there. Will pick his shots, and is really good at maintaining distance. So before we get any further, though, let's take a look at Chikadze. So he's got really solid kickboxing, really really solid kicks in my opinion. Very heavy body, leg, and head kick. He's got really good timing on his knees as well. And, like I said before, he's, very composed in there, very measured, and, just really good at picking his shots. Obviously, I'd say his biggest weakness right now is his takedown defense, his defensive grappling overall, and I'd say his, cardio. But I'm not sure if this is going to be the fighter to really push him. I just don't think that Swanson's going to be shooting takedowns or even chaining takedowns, at this point in his career. And I don't think that Swanson really has the cardio to really, push and work Chikadze into the later rounds. So yeah, I think that Chikadze takes this pretty easily. I really don't see too many paths to victory for Swanson. I think that Swanson, at least at this point in his career, kind of thrives on, opponents who are a little brawly and, swing a little wild in the pocket, and he's able to take advantage of it, like against Pineda to a certain extent. And, in this matchup, I just don't really see Chikadze being that guy. I think Chikadze is going to look to maintain the distance, just swing heavy with those leg kicks, body kicks, and, yeah, just look to kind of just beat up Swanson at distance. I honestly just have a pretty hard time seeing Swanson being able to close the distance effectively without taking a ton of damage. And obviously there is going to be a path to victory with the grappling, but again, I really don't think Swanson has the cardio at this stage to really, have a really effective grappling game against Chikadze. So yeah, as far as the pick goes, I'm going to have to go with Chikadze. And yeah, I just think that Chikadze is going to be too much for Swanson at distance. I'm also a bit tempted to take the Chikadze by KO prop. I think that, Chikadze is going to be hurting Swanson, with the body kicks, and potentially, Swanson's going to lower his hands later in the fight, and that's going to set him up for a pretty nasty head kick. But, Chikadze is not really like a headhunter by any means. He's more of an opportunistic knockout sort of guy. So it'll really just come down to how defensively sound Swanson is going into that fight. So while I kind of like the KO prop, I wouldn't be surprised if this went the distance. That said, though, Chikadze's got some really nasty kicks, and even if Swanson is able to block some of those on his forearms, I wouldn't be surprised if he broke his arm or something because of just all the injuries he's been through. So I'm leaning towards Chikadze KO, and if the odds are good on it, I might just take it. But I think Chikadze moneyline is a pretty good play. I might end up actually just eating the chalk here and laying the minus 200 on him, because I really have a hard time seeing Swanson getting the victory here. So again, the pick here is Chikadze, and as soon as I'm done recording this, I will likely put maybe 2 or 3 units on Chikadze. And in the main event, we have Dominic Reyes versus Jiří Prochazka. And Prochazka is going to be the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Reyes is plus 130. And let's start with Reyes. So on the feet, Reyes has got pretty good offensive striking, pretty accurate, and he mixes it up pretty well. And is also pretty defensively sound. Also keeps his hand up, head moving. Pretty good defensive grappling as well. It's really hard to take him down and keep him there. This guy fights really hard to stay off the ground and his back, and we'll look to keep the fight standing pretty much at all costs. I don't think it's going to matter too much in this matchup. I think both of these guys are strikers. I don't really see either guy really shooting for a takedown unless they're hurt. But yeah, outside of that, I think that this fight will largely be a stand-up fight. And his opponent, Jiří, is an absolute wild man on the feet. I mean, he is literally kill or be killed. I think he's only had 1 or 2 fights go the distance. He's got a very high-risk, high-reward sort of fight style where, it's very unorthodox. I mean, he's leaving his face out there, but, he's always moving his hands. Very just unorthodox movement. It's going to be really hard to get a read on him. But that said, though, he is extremely hittable. Again, he's got this style where he's kind of leaving his chin out on a platter for you, but he's also kind of baiting you to take shots at him where he'll look to just counterpunch. And he's got very accurate striking, very good counterpunching. So it's a very dangerous game that he plays. And while I find that really fun to watch, I don't know how I feel about that from a betting perspective. Like we saw in his last fight with Oezdemir, where he was doing the exact same thing, and for most of the fight, I'd say Oezdemir was piecing him up pretty badly, but he was able to eat a lot of those shots and eventually catch Oezdemir coming in. And up until that point, it was just such a sweaty fight, though. And going forward, I'm a little concerned with that fight style. I'm not sure if he can keep pulling that off. And against someone like Reyes, who definitely packs a punch, that's going to be a very, very dangerous game that he plays. But as far as how this fight is going to play out, I think it's going to be pretty similar to his Oezdemir fight. I think that there's going to be plenty of opportunities for Reyes to piece him up, and I think there's also going to be a lot of opportunities for Jiří to counterstrike, to land on Reyes. So I think it'll really come down to how aggressive Reyes is, if he's going to take the bait. If he's going to just stay a little more composed, stay a little more defensively sound. Reyes, he is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout against Jan Blachowicz, so he might be a little tentative going into this fight. So I really just don't know what the mentality of Reyes is, but I think if he stays, measured, stays composed, chop at the legs of Prochazka, pick his shots a little better, and not overextend or overcommit, he could get the win here. But that's really hard to say, because with the way Jiří fights, he tends to get his opponents like really flustered in there, and I feel like they start to abandon the game plan a bit. They feel like they might have a chance of getting the knockout, so they start to swing a little wild, open themselves up a little bit, and leave themselves open to getting hurt by Prochazka. So this is a really close fight in my opinion. I think should be near a pick'em, maybe a slight lean towards Prochazka, but I think this is going to be a really exciting fight. But as far as a pick goes, I'm gonna have to go with Reyes here. I think while he did have a really disappointing performance against Blachowicz, I think he's gonna bounce back. This guy's got a lot of skill too. I think this might be a good buy low spot on him. And while Jiří's got really slick striking, I think that just his defensive tendencies leave me a little concerned. I think that if Reyes is able to land clean on him, he could knock him out. I mean, Jiří, he has been knocked out before, and he's also been hurt. So especially with the way he fights, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Reyes to clip him and hurt him. And the fact that Reyes is the underdog in this fight, I tend to favor him a little bit more. I think the value is going to be on him. And, as far as, the stand-up goes, again, I think it is pretty 50-50. I think whoever is able to land clean on the other first is likely going to win. But I think if the fight does get extended, I tend to favor Reyes a bit more. Reyes, again, he has gone the distance, so I tend to favor him if it does go beyond, the third round into the fourth or fifth round. Furthermore, I think that Reyes has a style that's a bit more conducive to, winning rounds. He's a little more measured in there and is a bit more, defensively sound. So I tend to favor him, if the fight goes the distance. But there's a pretty good chance that it doesn't, in my opinion. So I'm going to side with Reyes here, especially, at underdog odds. So the pick here is Reyes. I might put a unit on Reyes, but the prop that I'm actually looking at is possibly the under or even fight ends in KO, because I really think that with how Prochazka fights, it's you either knock him out or he's going to knock you out. I really don't think that this fight is going to go the full 5 rounds. I think there's a really good chance that, one of these guys is going to get finished. So the pick here is Reyes, but yeah, I'm looking at the potentially the under prop, which hasn't come out yet, and I have a feeling it's going to be pretty juiced to maybe like -1.5 or -2.5. So yeah, I think the fight doesn't go the distance or fight ends in KO prop is going to be a pretty good look here. And that'll wrap up this installment. We got another one in the bag here. Hopefully we can go on a little bit of a run, because we're halfway through the year now and I'm still sitting at about -8 units. But it is what it is, and I hope you guys are still enjoying some of the content anyways. But yeah, I appreciate you guys liking and subscribing and sitting through all this. So yeah, hope you guys have a little better luck with some of your bets, and I'll catch you guys next week.